My oxygen recycler was producing exactly 0.73 kilograms of breathable air per hour, which sounds fine until you do the math and realize I needed 0.84. That 11-gram deficit was going to kill me in approximately 19 hours. I wrote the number on the wall of my cell in my own condensation, because I didn't have a pen, and because writing problems down is how I think. My name is Okafor, Dr. Yemi Okafor, exobiochemist assigned to the GSS Meridian, currently detained aboard the Vaelthari Royal Cruiser Saranthas on charges of, and I'm reading from the formal citation here, roughly translated, unauthorized biological interference with a sacred Vaelthari cultural artifact. The artifact in question was a dying enzyme cascade in their ship's atmospheric filtration unit. I'd fixed it. Apparently, that was a crime. The Vaelthari are tall, luminescent, and deeply committed to the idea that only a priest-engineer caste called the Vaelthari can touch sacred systems. Their biology is carbon-based like ours, their chemistry is nearly identical to ours, and their engineering is genuinely elegant but rigid. Every system has one correct way to be repaired. The Vaelthari learn it. The Vaelthari do it. No improvisation. No deviation. No random human biochemists deciding that a failing peptide chain recycler looks an awful lot like a problem they solved in a lab on Titan 4 years ago. I had solved it, for the record. The atmospheric quality in Corridor 7 had gone from 61% nominal to 94% nominal in 40 minutes. The Vaelthari priest engineer who arrived 20 minutes later had stared at the repaired unit, then at me, then at the unit again, and then called security. So now I was in a cell, working out how to survive on 87% of the oxygen I needed. Option 1, breathe less, biologically impossible, crossed off. Option 2, find supplemental oxygen. I had my field kit, which they'd confiscated. I had my uniform, which has no useful chemistry. I had a metal cup, a sleep mat, and a small ventilation grate that was pumping in the recycled air at its current inadequate rate. Option 3, fix the recycler. I looked at the ventilation grate. The recycler was behind it somewhere, had to be, given the airflow dynamics. I'd been in the cell for 3 hours and I'd already noticed two things. The air quality was slowly improving. Someone had noticed my fix downstream and hadn't undone it yet. And the grate had 4 screws with a non-standard head that looked suspiciously like it could be turned with the rim of my cup if I applied enough lateral pressure. I started working on the first screw. It took 11 minutes and I stripped the coating off the cup rim entirely, but it moved. "What are you doing?" The voice came from the observation window, a rectangle of transparent material set into the cell door at approximately eye height for a Vaelthari, which meant it was about 30 centimeters above my eye height, and I was looking at a luminescent collarbone. I stepped back to get a better angle. She was young for Vaelthari. Their bioluminescence dims with age, and hers was vivid, running in pale gold lines along her jaw and throat. She wore a circlet that I recognized from the briefing materials as indicating royal lineage. Not just royal, direct lineage. This was Princess Ithari Vel Saranth, second heir to the Vaelthari conclave, and she was looking at my cup with an expression I couldn't read. "Trying not to die," I said. "Your recycler is running at 87% capacity. That's 0.73 kilograms of O2 per hour. I need 0.84. Over 19 hours, that's a fatal deficit." She blinked. Her bioluminescence flickered. I would later learn this was the Vaelthari equivalent of a frown. The recycler in this unit was certified by the Vaelthari 3 cycles ago. 3 cycles is about 42 standard days by my math. The peptide chain matrix in these units degrades at roughly 1.2% per cycle under standard operational load. Over 42 days, you'd expect a 14 to 17% efficiency reduction. I held up the cup. "I'm going to open the grate and fix it. Is that going to get me a second citation, or are we past that?" She stared at me for a very long moment. "The Vaelthari will be notified," she said finally. How long will that take? Another flicker. They are currently performing the rite of calibration on the main drive regulators. It cannot be interrupted. 4 hours at minimum. So I have 4 hours to fix this before someone stops me. I turned back to the second screw. Great, tell them I said hi. I heard her make a sound I didn't have a translation for, and then the observation window went dark. I got the grate off in 40 minutes. The recycler unit was a compact cylinder about the size of my forearm, mounted in a recessed housing. The design was different from the atmospheric units I'd fixed in Corridor 7, but the underlying chemistry was the same. Vaelthari biofiltration runs on an enzyme-mediated carbon dioxide conversion pathway that's functionally analogous to what you'd find in a terrestrial bioreactor. The peptide chains were, as predicted, degraded. About 16% below optimal, which meant the 3-cycle certification was accurate and also deeply unhelpful, because whoever had set that certification schedule hadn't accounted for the higher CO2 load of a detention cell. I did the math in my head. A human producing approximately 200 grams of CO2 per hour compared to the Vaelthari standard load the recycler was rated for. I didn't know what that was exactly, but based on their larger lung volume, probably around 240 grams. The recycler was overstressed for my biology in a different direction than it was rated for. Interesting. I couldn't replace the peptide chains. I didn't have the biological material, but I could optimize the flow dynamics. The intake valve had a manual adjustment ring, I could see it, and by restricting the intake slightly, I could force the air through a longer contact path with the active enzyme surface. Less volume, higher conversion efficiency. Net oxygen output might actually increase. I reached in and started turning the ring. The observation window lit up again. You are modifying the filtration unit. She sounded, not alarmed, more like she was narrating something she didn't have a category for. Yes, I can't replace the degraded peptides, so I'm adjusting the flow path to maximize contact time with the active enzyme surface. Should get me up to about 0.81 kilograms per hour. Still under nominal, but the deficit drops to roughly 3 grams per hour, which gives me about 80 hours before it becomes a serious problem. Long enough for someone to either release me or bring me proper supplies. How do you know the contact time adjustment will increase conversion efficiency? Same principle as a packbed bioreactor on Earth. Slower flow, more reaction time. The math is the same regardless of what species designed the enzyme. I got the ring to the position I wanted and locked it. Can you check the atmospheric monitor for this cell? Should show a change in about 10 minutes. There was a long pause. Why would I do that? Because I might be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'd like to know before I put the grate back on. Another long pause, a different quality this time. I will observe, she said. Her name, I learned over the next 14 minutes while we waited for the atmospheric monitor to register the change, was indeed Vaelthari, and she was present on the Saranthas because a princess of her rank was required to observe all formal diplomatic proceedings, including, apparently, the detention of unauthorized alien engineers. She told me this in the clipped formal register that Vaelthari use when they're being professionally correct and personally curious, which I was coming to recognize as a specific combination. The monitor changed, 0.79 kilograms per hour, not quite 0.81, but significantly better than 0.73. It worked, she said, and her bioluminescence did something complicated. Close enough. I picked up the grate. The discrepancy is probably because the enzyme surface isn't uniform. Some sections are more degraded than others, so the extended contact time doesn't help evenly. If I had access to a standard Vaelthari bioculture kit, I could synthesize a fresh enzyme coating and get you to 100%, but I'll take 94%. You reduce the deficit from 11 grams per hour to 5. Yeah, more than enough time. I started replacing the screws. Assuming the Vaelthari don't fix it properly in the next 80 hours, I'll be fine. And honestly, if they fix it properly, I'm also fine. So either way, good outcome. I heard her make that untranslatable sound again. It was starting to seem less like confusion and more like something else. Dr. Okafor, she said. Yummy, I said. We've spent 14 minutes watching my air quality improve together. That's first name basis territory. A pause, then quietly, yummy. Why did you fix the atmospheric unit in Corridor 7? You knew it was a sacred system. You had been briefed. I looked up at the window. Because it was failing and people were breathing it, I said. Including your Vaelthari priest engineers, who were in that corridor doing calibration work and didn't notice because the decline was gradual enough to fall under their monitoring threshold. I noticed because I was bored and I was watching the numbers. I shrugged. The math said someone was going to pass out in Corridor 7 within about 6 hours. I had the knowledge to fix it. I fixed it. Her bioluminescence was doing something very specific that I didn't have a name for yet. The Vaelthari say the sacred systems must be maintained only by those who understand their full spiritual significance, she said. That the act of repair without that understanding causes harm even when it appears to cause good. With respect to the Vaelthari, the spiritual significance of a peptide chain recycler doesn't change the biochemistry. The enzyme was degraded. The air quality was dropping. The fix was the fix. I finished the last screw. I'm not dismissing what the Vaelthari believe. I'm saying that what I believe is, the math doesn't care about the ritual, and the people breathing the air care very much about the math. The observation window was quiet for a long time. I will speak to the diplomatic council, she said finally, about the conditions of your detention. I appreciate that. While you're at it, can you ask someone to bring me something to eat? I haven't run the caloric deficit math yet, but I'm going to go ahead and assume it's also not great. That sound again, definitely not confusion. She was gone before I could ask her what it meant. The Vaelthari arrived 6 hours later, not 4, because apparently the rite of calibration had encountered unexpected complications. I was not told what complications, but given that I'd been watching the drive regulator readings on the cell's environmental display, there was a small panel that showed general ship status, which I assumed they'd forgotten to restrict. I had a theory. The drive regulator readings had been fluctuating at 2–3% above nominal for the past 2 hours. In a human ship, that would mean a stuck feedback valve. In a Vaelthari ship, based on the engineering documentation I'd read in the diplomatic briefing packet, which, yes, I had memorized, because I memorize things, it's a whole thing. It probably meant the primary resonance calibration was fighting interference from a secondary harmonic somewhere in the system. The Vaelthari who came to my cell was named something I couldn't pronounce, so I internally called him Senior Engineer, which was close enough to his title. He was older, his bioluminescence a steady deep amber rather than Vaelthari's gold, and he looked at my repaired ventilation grate with an expression that translated pretty clearly across species lines as professional offense. "You have tampered with a sacred system," he said, through the translator unit they'd finally provided. "I've fixed 2 sacred systems, actually," I said. "The one in Corridor 7 and the one in this cell. Both are running better than they were. I have the numbers if you want them. The method of repair is as important as the outcome." I agree with that philosophically. Pragmatically, I'd point out that the outcomes are measurable and positive. I leaned against the wall. I also notice your drive regulator readings have been at 103% nominal for 2 hours. Is the rite of calibration going okay? His bioluminescence flickered hard. That is not your concern. No, it's not. But I've been watching the numbers, and if the variance pattern I'm seeing is what I think it is, you've got a secondary harmonic interference in your resonance calibration array, which your rite won't fix because the rite addresses the primary calibration sequence and the interference is coming from outside that sequence. I paused. I could be wrong. I often am, but the math is suggesting I'm not. Silence. The rite of calibration has been performed identically for 200 cycles, he said. It has never failed. When you say never failed, do you mean the drive regulators have always returned to nominal, or the rite has always been completed? Another flicker. The rite is always completed. Right, those are different things. He left without another word, which I took as a point for me. Vaelthari came back an hour later. She didn't explain why she kept coming back, and I didn't ask, because I had a theory about that too, and I wasn't sure I was ready to examine it. The calibration rite is not resolving, she said without preamble. I know. 103% nominal is now 104.2%. The variance is increasing at roughly 0.6% per hour, which means you've got maybe 36 hours before it becomes a structural problem. I'd been doing the math on the environmental display. The senior Vaelthari engineer didn't want to hear my theory about the secondary harmonic. Tell me. So I did. I walked her through it, the physics of resonance interference, the way a minor harmonic mismatch compounds over time, the signature you'd expect to see in the variance readings. I drew a diagram on the sleep mat with a scratched line from my cup rim. She watched and listened with an attention that felt different from polite diplomatic focus. The rite addresses the primary calibration nodes in sequence, she said slowly. Yes, but if there's an interference source outside those nodes, the rite is essentially trying to tune a guitar while someone's playing a slightly different note on a piano in the next room. You can tune all you want. The interference is still there. Where is the interference coming from? That I don't know. I'd need to see the full resonance array schematic, and I'd need to not be in a cell. I spread my hands. I'm not using this as leverage. I genuinely can't diagnose the source location from the environmental display. I'd need access to the engineering systems. She looked at me for a long moment. You fixed Corridor 7 because people were going to be harmed, she said. Yes. And the cell recycler because you were going to be harmed. Also yes. And now you're offering to help with the drive regulators because I've been watching the numbers for 6 hours, and it's driving me crazy not to at least try to find the source. I paused. And because 104.2% in climbing is going to become your problem before it becomes my problem, and you have a lot more people on this ship than I do. Her bioluminescence shifted through a pattern I hadn't seen before. Complex, almost conversational, like the light itself was working something out. I will speak to the council, she said, again. You spend a lot of time speaking to the council on my behalf. You keep creating situations that require it. Fair point. For what it's worth, I appreciate it. She paused at the door. The sound I keep making, she said without turning around. When you explain things, you've been wondering what it means. I hadn't said that out loud. I was fairly sure I hadn't said that out loud. Maybe. In your language, there's no exact equivalent. A pause. It is the sound we make when something disrupts a pattern we believed was complete, when a system we thought we understood reveals a new variable. Another pause longer. We don't make it often. It is considered significant. She left. I sat down on the sleep mat and looked at the scratched diagram I'd made. Then I looked at the atmospheric readings. 0.79 kilograms per hour. Deficit down to 5 grams. Plenty of time. I started working out the harmonic interference math in my head, because there was a problem to solve and I had a lot of time and a cup with a stripped rim, and that, it turns out, is sometimes enough. They gave me access to the engineering systems 14 hours later, after the drive regulator variance hit 106%, and 2 of the Vaelthari calibration priests independently confirmed that the rite was not resolving the issue. Vaelthari escorted me personally, which I understood was a significant statement within Vaelthari court protocol, and senior engineer walked behind us with the energy of someone deeply unhappy about every choice that had led to this moment. The resonance array was beautiful. I mean that it was a genuinely elegant piece of engineering, a three-dimensional lattice of crystalline nodes that modulated the drive's quantum resonance field through a process that was, as far as I could determine, analogous to noise-canceling technology, except for faster-than-light travel. The Vaelthari had spent 200 cycles perfecting the calibration ritual because the calibration ritual worked. It was designed for a specific interference environment, and for 200 cycles, that environment had been stable. "When did you last take on passengers?" I asked, looking at the schematic display. "This diplomatic mission, 42 standard days ago," senior engineer through gridded translator. "And before this mission, the Rite always resolved the variance." "Always." I looked at the schematic, I looked at the readings, I ran the numbers. "The interference source isn't in your ship," I said. "It's in mine." Silence. "The GSS Meridian uses a quantum entanglement communication array," I said. "Standard model, runs at," I thought about it, "about 2.4 terahertz carrier frequency. Your resonance array's third harmonic is at 2.41 terahertz. I pointed at the display. "Your ships have never been in extended proximity to a human vessel. The Rite was designed for your interference environment. Our comm array isn't in your interference environment, or wasn't, until 42 days ago when we docked for this mission." The readings were very clear, now that I knew what I was looking for. The interference was coming from a specific vector that corresponded exactly to the Meridian's docking position. Not malicious, not even significant by our engineering standards. The Meridian's comm array wasn't doing anything unusual. It was just existing at 2.4 terahertz, and the Saranthas's resonance calibration system had never had to account for that frequency in its environment. The fix is either physically move the meridian to increase the signal attenuation with distance, or add a notch filter to